The entire factory fell silent the moment the final test failed. A $3 million engine, designed by some of the brightest engineers in the country, had just died for the 17th time. Red warning lights flashed across the testing room, alarms echoed through the building, and exhausted experts slowly lowered their heads in defeat. Months of work, endless meetings, expensive equipment, and brilliant minds had reached a dead end. Outside the security fence, however, a dusty pickup truck rolled into the morning sunlight. Behind the wheel sat a quiet single father carrying an old metal toolbox that looked older than the engine itself. No one inside imagined that before the sun set, the man everyone ignored would solve the mystery that millions of dollars could not. Before we continue, if you believe kindness deserves a second chance and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Journey. Your support helps more inspiring stories reach hearts around the world. Ethan Mercer had never expected life to become so difficult. At 38 years old, he lived in a small rented house on the edge of a quiet town with his 9-year-old daughter, Lily. Ever since his wife had passed away after a sudden illness 3 years earlier, every sunrise had become another promise that he would somehow keep moving forward. He packed Lily's lunch every morning, braided her hair after watching online tutorials late at night, helped with homework after long workdays, and always smiled even when the refrigerator held very little food. His greatest dream was not becoming rich. It was making sure Lily never felt the emptiness he carried inside his own heart. Years earlier, Ethan had worked as a master mechanical technician at a respected manufacturing company. He had never earned fancy titles or expensive degrees, but his hands possessed something textbooks could never fully teach. Machines spoke to him in tiny vibrations, unusual sounds, and subtle movements. He could often identify problems simply by placing one hand against warm metal and listening carefully. Older mechanics admired him, but when the company replaced experienced technicians with newer automated systems, Ethan lost his job. Since then, he repaired tractors, delivery trucks, generators, and farming equipment wherever people needed honest work done. One bright morning, while fixing an old excavator near an industrial complex, Ethan noticed unusual activity outside one of the largest engineering companies in the region. Television vans, security guards. As Ethan loaded his worn tools back into his pickup, an elderly security guard recognized him from years earlier. The guard remembered Ethan's reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems. With nothing left to lose, the guard quietly mentioned his name to a desperate supervisor. Although several managers laughed at the suggestion of calling an unemployed repairman, the project director finally agreed. Pride had already failed them. Perhaps humility deserved one chance. Inside the enormous testing facility, Ethan felt dozens of skeptical eyes watching every movement. Engineers wearing spotless uniforms stood beside advanced computers displaying thousands of performance measurements. Their expensive equipment filled the room with blinking screens and complex calculations. Ethan simply placed his old toolbox on the floor and looked directly at the silent engine resting beneath bright daylight streaming through massive windows. He asked for every computer display to be turned off. The request shocked everyone. They believed success would come from more data, but Ethan wanted silence. The room became still enough to hear distant birds outside. Ethan slowly walked around the massive engine several times without touching it. Then he knelt beside it, closed his eyes, and rested one hand against the metal housing. Several engineers exchanged amused smiles, convinced the visitor had no idea what he was doing. Yet Ethan ignored every stare. Years of experience had taught him patience. Machines often revealed their secrets only to people willing to listen instead of forcing answers. After nearly 20 minutes, Ethan requested that the engine be started one more time. It coughed, shook violently, and stopped exactly as before. Everyone sighed in disappointment except Ethan. He smiled very gently. Instead of opening a laptop, Ethan reached into his weathered toolbox and removed an old mechanic's stethoscope, a simple flashlight, a hand file, and a tiny homemade measuring tool he had crafted years ago. Each tool carried scratches from decades of honest work. The engineers watched in silence as he inspected a small section deep inside the engine housing that none of them considered important. He noticed microscopic marks showing that one precision component expanded unevenly after warming for several minutes. The measurements on the computers never revealed the problem because the defect appeared only under very specific temperatures and vibration patterns. The expensive engineering software had assumed every manufactured part behaved perfectly according to its design. Ethan knew reality rarely followed perfect calculations. Real machines developed personalities shaped by pressure, heat, wear, and tiny imperfections invisible on digital screens. Working carefully under the bright afternoon sunlight pouring through the high factory windows, Ethan removed the component, polished an almost invisible rough edge with his hand file, adjusted its alignment using his homemade gauge, and tightened several bolts in a sequence different from the official assembly manual. Every movement came from decades of practical experience rather than written instructions. When he finished, he quietly stepped back and asked the engineers to start the engine once more. The room filled with nervous anticipation. The starter engaged. The engine roared to life. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. 30 seconds. 1 minute. The violent shaking disappeared. The warning lights remained dark. The deep mechanical sound settled into a smooth, confident rhythm unlike anything anyone had heard before. No alarm sounded. No smoke appeared. The massive testing hall erupted into stunned silence before cheers exploded from every corner. Some engineers simply stood frozen, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Months of frustration had ended because a single father carrying worn tools had noticed what millions of dollars worth of technology had overlooked. The company executives rushed into the testing room after hearing the celebration. They expected another failure but instead found employees applauding Ethan with genuine respect. The project director walked toward him with tears forming in his eyes. The demonstration scheduled for investors the following morning was suddenly possible again. Thousands of employees who feared losing their jobs would now have hope. News spread through the factory within hours. Workers who had ignored Ethan when he first arrived now thanked him sincerely. Many admitted they had judged him by his faded clothes, old pickup truck, and battered toolbox instead of recognizing the wisdom earned through years of honest labor. Later that afternoon, Ethan quietly packed his tools, believing his work was finished. He expected to receive a simple thank you before returning home to cook dinner for Lily. Instead, the company's president invited him into a conference room overlooking the factory floor. Rather than discussing money immediately, the president asked Ethan one question that surprised everyone. He wanted to know why Ethan had remained so calm while dozens of experts doubted him. Ethan explained that raising a daughter alone had taught him something far more valuable than fixing engines. Every difficult day reminded him that panic solved nothing. Patience, kindness, and careful observation often repaired broken lives just as surely as they repaired broken machines. When Lily cried after missing her mother, he could not rush her healing. He simply stayed beside her until the pain slowly became hope. Machines, he believed, deserved the same patience. The room became completely quiet. Many executives lowered their eyes, realizing they had spent months arguing with one another instead of patiently understanding the problem before them. The following morning, investors gathered beneath bright blue skies as the revolutionary engine completed every performance test without a single failure. Reporters praised the company's remarkable recovery, but the president surprised everyone by inviting Ethan onto the stage. Rather than taking credit for the breakthrough, he publicly acknowledged that true expertise was not measured by expensive offices or prestigious titles. Sometimes greatness arrived carrying an old toolbox and wearing work boots covered in dust. Television interviews soon followed, but Ethan never allowed success to change his priorities. Every evening he still hurried home before sunset because Lily waited excitedly to tell him about school. She cared far more about sharing drawings, homework, and bedtime stories than hearing about newspaper headlines. To Ethan, those quiet moments remained life's greatest achievement. The engineering company offered Ethan a senior position leading practical diagnostics and mentoring young engineers. Instead of replacing advanced technology, he taught future designers to combine innovation with humility. He reminded them that every machine would eventually teach a lesson no computer could predict. Knowledge became strongest when education respected experience instead of competing against it. Months later, new employees entering the factory noticed something unusual displayed inside a glass case near the main entrance. It was not a gold trophy or an expensive prototype. It was Ethan's old metal toolbox, carefully preserved beside a simple plaque that read, "Never underestimate honest hands, patient hearts, or quiet wisdom." Lily visited the factory one sunny afternoon during summer vacation. She proudly watched engineers greet her father with respect. She remembered nights when he repaired old lawnmowers under daylight in neighbors' yards just to pay school expenses. She remembered patched shoes, simple meals, and birthdays celebrated with homemade cakes instead of expensive gifts. Standing beside the preserved toolbox, she finally understood something her father had quietly taught every day without saying it aloud. Real wealth was measured by character, not possessions. Years passed, but employees continued telling new recruits about the day hope returned because one father refused to believe any problem was impossible. The story inspired countless young mechanics, technicians, and engineers to value both learning and humility. Whenever difficult projects seemed hopeless, someone inevitably smiled and said, "Maybe we're only one patient pair of hands away from the answer." If this story touched your heart, please support this video by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing to Kindness Tales Journey. Your encouragement allows more inspiring stories of hope, compassion, and second chances to reach people who may need them most today. Special request, please comment with the words, "Kindness always wins," if you believe patience, humility, and a caring heart can accomplish what pride and doubt never could. As the evening sun gently lit the factory grounds, Ethan and Lily walked toward their old pickup truck together. The truck was still dusty. The toolbox was still worn. Their house was still small. Yet their hearts were fuller than ever before. The world had finally discovered what Lily had always known, that the strongest hands are guided by love, the greatest minds remain humble, and the most extraordinary heroes often live the simplest lives. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not fixing a $3 million engine. Sometimes the greatest miracle is proving that kindness, perseverance, and quiet determination can repair broken hope itself.